Hey folks, 2023 was a hell of a reading year for me. I read a lot less than in 2022, but I still did great and got some amazing books. I got 25 5-star reads in this entire year, which I still cannot believe, but I'm also looking forward to actually going through and deep diving into each and every little statistic that I have for this year. I have them all written down in my trusty notebook, so first up, the pages read. I read a total of 28,419 pages this year. Very happy with that. Wish I'd read 2,000 more, just so that it was just squeezed into that 30k band, but I'm still very pleased with that amount. And like I said before, that was across 86 books. Now obviously I mentioned that 25 of the 86 were 5 stars, but 74% of all of my books were 4 stars or higher, so 4, 4.5 or 5 stars. That is absolutely ridiculous, and I can't believe I've had such a good reading year. Like, it's a struggle to find any bad books or any books I didn't actively enjoy this year, which is great, but I'm sure I will find one or two on my spreadsheet. I definitely was trying to move more into the audiobook scene this year. I listened to a total of 153.2 hours of audiobooks, and the most that I read was in November with 58 hours of audiobooking then. I am trying to do it more when I'm at work, but I tend to just watch YouTube videos instead. And whilst watching booktube is something that I do really enjoy, I need to try and switch it out and like set that as audiobook time. Speaking of how I read them, 86% of the books that I read were read physically. I am still very much physically reading, and to be honest, I'm not that mad at that stat because I do have a lot of physical books on my TBR that I need to get to, so the amount of digital books that I'm reducing is definitely a good thing. Even though I love reading via my ebook, via audiobooks, they're all fantastic ways to read and I love doing that too, but I own a lot of books and I need to get through them. In terms of the age ranges for the books that I was reading, I used to read mostly adult with a fair bit of YA, so maybe, you know, like 60% adult, 40% YA, with the actual numbers being made up with a couple of middle grades. This year I read 76% adult, and the rest of it was split 50-50 between middle grade and YA. I have fully moved into reading adult books now. I really don't read a lot of YA or middle grade anymore, and I just find that really interesting. Like, it doesn't really matter either way. I will still be picking up some YA and some middle grade regardless of my age, but it's not a conscious decision I've been making, it's just kind of happened, and I find that fascinating. That it's just kind of happened as I've gotten older. Obviously I'm 27 now, I'm getting on. So it makes sense that I'm not reading books, you know, that were aimed at me 10 years ago. But it's still interesting to see because obviously not everyone does that. There's quite a lot of people who are my age or older who read a lot of YA. So I didn't know it was going to happen. This year I started 14 new series and I only finished out 5, with 56% of my books being standalone. So I really was not aiming for those series this year. I was just letting them sit there and take their sweet time. That was not my aim this year. It very much is for 2024. I would like to get a lot more of these series off of my TBR onto my bright shelves. I like the previous book. Come on Abby, come on. Now, this is a new stat for me, and it's very small, but I read one of my 86 books not in English. Still very proud of that. Still very pleased with myself. I read a kid's book in Swedish. Don't take this away from me. It's here actually. It is this one. I love it. It's great fun. So yes, I read this. I read it in Swedish. I'm very pleased with myself. So yeah, it's not gonna be growing much. I do have another Swedish book and one German book that I own that are in those languages. I don't think it'll grow too much in 2024, but you know, I'm happy that I did it. For the representation for disabilities and for LGBTQ+ representation in the books that I've been reading, it needs to improve. The disability rep, I think I said the same thing last year, the disability rep, theoretically books that have something in are much better than the LGBTQ+ rep, but that's just because there will be, you know, a disability mentioned in a side character. There's not a lot of main characters that have disabilities. So I really do need to try and hunt down some more books for that. It's not something that is often focused on, obviously, because a lot of authors are abled, not all of them, but some of them are. So I am trying to hunt down more books that feature disabled protagonists. There are a few that I have my eye on that I'm going to be adding to my wish list. And then with the LGBTQ+, I have less where it's present, but more where it's the main character, and unfortunately a fair bit where there's none at all. That's a mixture of reading classics and backlogged books, but also just the fact that some of the books don't have any representation in them. I am getting consistently okay numbers. I would like them to be higher, but I also need to recognise that I've been doing this for years, for like 4 years now, but trying to work through my backlog of my physical TBR. It grew exponentially when I moved out of my house with my parents, and it is slightly ridiculous. And once I've finally gotten a handle on that, which I'm really trying to do this year, my 2024 goals are really gonna force me to really hone in on my actual physical TBR this year. And so then hopefully once I've actually done that, I can then buy some more books in that have much better representation. My average book length. So I was interested in this one because I did read some longer books this year, but it works out as an average of 331, which is fascinating. So technically I read Les Mis in 2 parts, and it was gifted to me by Olivia, so I asked her how I'm categorising it, as 1 book or as 2, and she said as 2. So I do get 2 books that are over 500 pages, but I don't get the 1 book that's 1,000 pages. So it's both good and bad. And as always, I read a lot of books that are in that 300 page bracket, and I'll always end up reading just more smaller books because they take me no time at all. I'm a really fast reader, and so if I pick up a small book, it will likely be done in that sitting, if not just in 2 sittings. And so I tend to just blast through them without realising. So I am still working on reading those bigger books. You can see that there are some more at the end there, but I just need more. I need more bigger books. I always do. And then the genre breakdown. So I read 17 different genres in total, and the 6 main ones were fantasy at 28%, sci-fi at 14%, non-fiction at 17%, classics and contemporary are both at 9%, and horror is at 5%. So the horror is a new one. I have very much been trying to actually categorise books that may be horror as horror. Previously I've just been shoving them in fantasy or sci-fi or whatever they actually fall under elsewhere, but I'm trying to realise when a book is actually horror now. And then also fantasy, it's always going to be bigger than sci-fi anyway, but also if a book is both. So for example, The Bone Season or Gideon the Ninth are both fantasy and sci-fi, I think. Yeah, no, I think I put both of them under fantasy because to me they're both, and so I just shove it under fantasy. I need to figure that out. But yeah, so that will be slightly artificially inflated. Then I read 10 books in translation, which is a lot less than last year, which was a surprise. Usually I read a fair number of books in translation. 10 is not many for me. 46% of those were from Japan, with 18% of them being either Arabic and or French. That's not how I word that. Both Arabic and French had 18%. Spanish was 9%, and then Swedish technically doesn't count at all because I didn't read any translated books in Swedish, but I read a book that was originally written in Swedish, and that would be 9%. I feel like that counts. Then the format. So 64% of the books that I read this year were novels, 20% of them were non-fiction. I'm very pleased with that. I'm always looking to put more non-fiction on my TBR. It can be a lot slower and therefore seems more difficult to read through, but I can really get a lot of insight into things by reading non-fiction. I love reading a good non-fiction. It really just is so enjoyable. So I'm really glad that I seem to be pushing those numbers up a little bit. And then 7% novellas, which obviously is very small, but I am reading some novellas and I have some more. I've stored them all up. They are ready and waiting for me to read. I'm tempted to do a 24-hour readathon thing on my own. I'm also dreading it. So that just sat there for now. But yes, they're there. I have quite a few small ones, so I'm sure I will blast through those at some point in 2024. Then how I acquired most of these books, and I am pleased to say that 48% of them were books that I owned already, which is a fairly decent number, but I feel like I must have gone wrong somewhere because no, I put bought in, I put book box in, yeah. Half of the books I read I already owned, but I guess that is only like 43. Well, less than that, so I'll say 42. So, doesn't sound as impressive when you put it like that, just, you know, with the fact that my TBR is fucking huge. And then my most common publisher was Penguin. I read 7 books from Penguin, and most of the books that I read were published in 2023. So that was just the biggest percentage. I also had a fairly big percentage from 2022, and everything else was pretty even. I had some from the 1800s, a few different years around there when I'm reading some classics, and some, you know, just from late 90s, the noughts, the 10s, it's a good spread. It's a good spread. I'm always surprised that I read so much new stuff. Now for the authors of the books that I read. So I read from 75 different authors overall, and the author that I read the most from, unsurprisingly, if you know about my reading, is Douglas Adams, because I read all 5 of his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books this year. So I didn't read as many from anyone else. I read, you know, like 2 from Victor Hugo, because of the Les Mis. I read some from Derek Landy as always, 2 from Samantha Shannon, but Douglas Adams right at the top there with his 5 books in that series. 62% of the authors that I was reading from were brand new to me. I always love finding new authors. I found so many amazing authors this year that I absolutely loved reading from, so I'm hoping I will be able to pick up some more from them in the future. But also still making some good progress with 38% of the previous authors that I've already read from before. I assume with me trying to read more series in 2024 that number's going to go up and I'm going to read less new authors. Then 34% of the books that I read were from authors of colour. That is not very high, and I was concerned at first, and I went and looked at last year's spreadsheet and it's actually 4% higher than last year. So it is increasing slowly. Too slowly obviously, but I am increasing it. It is actually primarily 54% Asian authors, which I wasn't expecting, but made sense when I went and looked back through the books that were from non-white authors. So apparently I've been reading a lot of Asian authors this year, primarily that, so I do need to diversify my diversifying apparently. But yes, it is increasing, it is slow, for the same reasons I've been mentioning all the time, but I am glad that it is going up. It is showing that I'm moving out that primarily white TBR that I had when I first started and was just picking up all the popular books, and I'm actually getting in interesting, diverse authors that are fascinating to read from. So it's improving. I will take the win. For gender, 56% of my authors were female. That is quite low for me. Usually the females are ruling the roost in my reading. I've read a lot more men this year. It is starting to even out. I had a time where I was reading just pretty much all women. So it's starting to even out now. I think it was, that's 56%, I think 40% were men and the other 4% were either mixed authors, non-binary, or don't state. And then my final statistic is about the nationality of the authors. I need a drink because my voice is going. So, unfortunately, my most common nationality is American. No one is surprised. If you're wondering why this is unfortunately, I am British. Brits were 29% of my reading. Americans, well, actually I think slightly more than that. Is that where I screwed up? I think that's where I screwed up. Oh, thank God. Okay, I'll put it on the screen here. I'm not able to go and look it up now because my computer is awful. English authors were 29%. English and or British. US was 31%. But I also read from some Scottish authors, I'm pretty sure. I categorise all the countries separately when I can, but some people like myself, I am British. I'm not English. I'm not Scottish. I'm British. So I have all of the categories. Welcome to our wonderful messed up little island. So yes, I think potentially I may have been out America. I really hope so, because I don't like that it's the top. Obviously it's the one that we get promoted to us the most. America has the big budget to push the books. They're already in English. They're the ones that get hyped. The internet is very American focused. So it makes sense, but I do wish I didn't read so many American authors. I am annoyed by it every year. And then everything else was pretty even, other than me having 8% Japanese authors. So apparently it's America, Britain and Japan. And that is my reading, that is everything. So pretty decent year, pretty interesting stats. I'm looking forward to setting up for next year and to tracking all of those, and we'll see how I go. Hopefully again I'll keep seeing improvements on my authors of colour, and I will see what happens with those series. Let me know what stats you track in the comments down below. I know some people don't track pages, for example, but if you do, I would love to know how many pages you've read. I know some of you will have read enough pages that leave me in the dust, so I would love to know. If you'd like to see how my 2024 reading stats go, then you'll have to click subscribe down below, and hopefully I'll see you folks in the next one. Bye!